the last part of today's session, which is study sample. And there is a lot to explain about study sample. So we go about describing them one by one. Why do I need a sample? So please understand that most of the research are usually done on only a sample of the study participants and not all participants. In the previous session, also we gathered clarity about what study population, what's accessible population, what is our actual study sample, right? So neither it is necessary to study everyone. So for example, if I wish to find out what's the BMI of people with polycystic ovarian syndrome, I need not go and talk to every patient with PCOS in my hospital, right? I can take up only a small sample, right? But that sample has to be sufficient enough to give me concrete results. Three important things to describe in your study sample. One is whom to select, and that's your selection criteria. There are inclusion criteria and there are exclusion criteria as well. When we go into detail, you'll realize what we discussed in the previous session is going to help us here. Second is how are you going to select, right? So what's the sampling method we are going to employ? And what's conceptually important is to ensure that your study sample is representative of the target population, right? Because you are going to extrapolate your findings to that. And what are the problems we anticipate there? And what things to take care? The last part is how many to select, what the sample size. And we'll be using some formula. If our study is quantitative, we'll be using some formula to arrive at the sample size. And we'll have a separate short video on demonstration of one of the tools for sample size calculation. Right? Mostly we'll be demonstrating on the statulator, which is one of the tools there for sample size calculation. And we'll be recording a video and making it available in the classroom. But when you calculate the sample size and when you decide the final sample size in your STS proposal, one component, so I mean, it's a balance between two aspects. One aspect is that you want to go with a higher sample size so that you can prove to the reviewer that you studied sufficiently large number of people. But then studying those many large number of people might not be feasible, or those many number of people might not be available, right? So it's always a balance between the feasibility and the scientific rigor, right? So say for example, if your study is among chronic non-healing ulcers in surgery department in the surgical wards. Now chronic non-healing ulcers is not, I mean, it's you will find many patients in your surgery ward with ulcers, but non-healing ulcers might not be very common, right? So the number of people available with that particular condition would be very less. So you have a feasibility issue as well. So you would be able to study only that many who get admitted in future when you are doing the data collection. Okay? So feasibility as well as the large sample size, both of them, they are at two different ends and you have to balance between the two. So we are going to talk about them one by one. So we go with the selection criteria. So this is a conceptual diagram. So say for example, what's blue is your accessible population, right? Or let's say your target population. What's there in orange dots is your study sample, right? So your selection criteria. So what you will mention in your study protocol in study sample is first is selection criteria. Then your selection criteria is nothing but what we ended up discussing the last time, which is target population. Describe what's the clinical and demographic criteria of your target population and geographic and temporal criteria of your accessible population, right? So those are the people whom you would be studying. So those are the people who will be in your sampling frame, right? From that frame, you are going to draw study sample. So say for example, if there are 500 people with polycystic ovarian syndrome from your hospital in a particular period in time, you are not going to study all 500, but probably you are going to study only 50. So who are those 50? So you will be probably employing some sampling method to select those 50. You use the sample size filter to arrive at magic figure of 50 samples. And you might also have some exclusion criteria, right? So you'll be mentioning in your studies sample or study population, in your description of study population, you will be writing selection criteria. You will be describing what's your sampling method. You will be describing sample size and probably an entire paragraph of the calculation. And you will also mention some of the exclusion criteria, right? So your selection criteria would be your inclusion criteria, and there might be some exclusion criteria as well, right? So also, I mean, at this point, I need to clarify that many times the students say that all of those participants who do not meet my inclusion criteria were excluded. It's not like that, right? So, in exclusion criteria is that for all those study participants who otherwise met your study inclusion criteria, but they had some issues, right? Because of which you remove them from participation, right? So those are the reasons for exclusion. So let's take on the next example, those reasons for exclusion. So we take two examples. The delays in treatment for myocardial infarction. So inclusion criteria is 18 years and older people who are diagnosed with ST elevation myocardial infarction. This is a type of myocardial infarction, and who received fibrinolysis as a treatment, right? So fibrinolysis is one of the treatments of myocardial infarction. Present in the emergency department of XYZ hospital and treated between these two time periods. Right? So these are the inclusion criteria. These kind of demographic and clinical indicators and come into this place during this time. Now, among those people, I will be excluding if someone interfered with loss to follow. So people who do not have a valid telephone number. So say, for example, if you intended to take retrospective data and collect information on time of symptom onset and time of arrival at the hospital to telephonic calls. And if the patient's detail telephone number is not there or it is incorrect, you will exclude those people. Or it inferiors quality of the data. Those with chief complaint other than the chest pain, which was the first symptom to appear. So which will make your pointing out the symptom onset a bit difficult because patient did not start with chest pain as the symptom as the primary symptom onset, right? Or at risk of possible harm. So patients with absolute contraindications to fibrinolysis. So these kind of patients probably would not be given fibrinolysis treatment and probably would be put to some other kind of management where the time from door to needle, the time from patient arriving to the hospital to patient given the treatment would be substantially different. And since your intention is to find out for fibrinolysis mode of treatment, what's the pre-hospital and within hospital delay, probably you will exclude them. Let's take another example. Screening for hypertension among tribal community. So 30 to 60 years age group people, adults categorized as high risk during community-based assessment checklist. You are not taking up everyone, but only those people who are categorized as high risk and residing in that particular village and who are available for interview during the study period. Somebody might be residing, but when you visited, the person was not available at home. So obviously, you cannot include them. So your exclusion criteria is not anybody who was not available becomes your exclusion criteria. Right? Exclusion criteria is someone who was available at home but had some of these three issues. Had an issue with possibility of problematic follow-up. So say, for example, if you are intending that you wish to follow them up after 1 month and find out what proportion of them after giving referral actually visited nearby hospital or nearby primary clinic and followed them up. Probably those migratory tribal laborers might not be living in the same area after 1 month, and hence you exclude them because you will not be able to collect follow-up data among them. Interfere with quality data. So among those people who are available for interview, you might meet 1 or 2 people who are facing intellectual disabilities, who are facing hearing disabilities, and hence you might not be able to collect data from them, right? So you might exclude. You might exclude people who are at risk of possible harm, right? So people who are currently experiencing some kind of medical crisis. So rather than you expecting them to be participating in your research, you would probably be allowing them to seek medical care, seek acute medical care, right? So that's the reason why you might exclude them, right? So that's some clarity about how do we describe our study population. One part of study population is ensuring representativeness of the sample. So time is important, seasonality is important. We talked about dengue study earlier. Dengue is common only in some weeks, let's say monsoon. So if I were to look at the segregation of plastic waste, it makes sense to do the study in monsoon. If the study is on mortality pattern, we understand that commonly there is a seasonal variation in the mortality pattern. Some kind of diseases are more common in summer, the other kind of diseases are more common in, let's say, winter. So it would be better to take data from the entire year, or if you take data from only one particular season, we are likely to be a little biased. Day of the week also. So imagine your pre-hospital delay study recruits patients from medicine A unit, which has the emergency day on Monday. So as you go to the clinical wards, you will realize that your clinical departments, the big departments usually work in different units, and different units have their OPD and emergency day on a fixed day of the week. So one of the units would have OPD and emergency in, let's say, on Monday. So if your guide belongs to a unit which has emergency on Monday, and if you decide that all of your patients for this particular study pre-hospital delay are going to be recruited on Monday, the picture is likely to be very different compared to those people who land up in your OPD on Tuesday, right? On Sundays, everyone within the community would realize that not many hospitals would be open, and hence probably there is likely to be a higher likelihood of delay on the patient side. If you do the only study among the multi patients, if you do study, so hence it would be a good idea to take up people, sufficient number or probably equal number of people all throughout the week rather than on specific days of the week. Time of the day, assume that your study on pre-hospital delay recruited patients only during daytime. The nighttime patients would have delay, which might be far systematically different than patients coming in the daytime to hospital wards, emergencies. Right? So take care of those things. So take care of your sample throughout the year, throughout the days, all the days of the week, and also, if possible, take out sample who are coming to your hospital during all the time periods. Hospital versus community. So, for example, if I'm interested in looking at the quality of life among people with polycystic ovary, if I'm doing the study in hospital, probably the quality of life scores are expected to be poorer. If I'm going to the community and find out the score, probably the scores are more likely to be better, right? Because all those people with polycystic ovarian syndrome, who are the patients who will come to hospital? Obviously, those patients who are suffering from some kind of an illness, the clinical severity is higher, and hence they are coming to the OPD. So, the quality of life of the people coming to OPD is obviously going to be little less compared to the average person with polycystic ovary who is living there in this country. Levels of care in the system. So, for example, quality of life scores are expected to be poorer in tertiary care facility versus primary care facilities. So, for example, if you are interested in pediatric type 1 diabetic patients and looking at the glycemic control, and if you take up people from primary health centers, the glycemic control is likely to be better. If you take up people from pediatric wards in your hospital, the glycemic control is obviously likely to be little poorer than what you expect at primary health, right? So think of these, keep in mind those possibilities as well. So when you write implications, when you are discussing the study findings, all those things would matter. The next is sampling methods. Now, in your ICM or STS, your community medicine sessions might also talk to you more in detail about sampling methods in biostatistics part. Here, we are taking very short time to quickly understand what are the different sampling methods available and taking few of the examples and which would apply where, and some of the tips as to take care. So primarily two types of sampling methods. One is probability, the other one is non-probability methods. So we'll start with the non-probability methods. So two scientific words that you come across very commonly. One is a convenience sampling, the other one is a purposive sampling. Okay? So convenience sampling says that I did not, I mean, whoever was easy to collect data from, so I collected data from those people. So say for example, if you are interested to find out what proportion of college students have internet addiction, right? And if you go to 5 different colleges of the city, probably in the science stream, on the humanities stream, or in the commerce stream, probably that would not be a convenient sampling. But if you conduct the study among the medical students within your own hospital, it's a convenient study, right? So, what study is not a convenient study? So, say for example, if you are measuring something which is very exclusive to medical students, so say for example, what proportion of medical students have a history of a needle stick injury in last 1 year. Now, needle stick injury cannot happen to commerce or science students. It's specific to medical students. Or if you are doing similar study among nursing students, then it could be called as a purposive sampling. Otherwise, for everything else which you can likely measure among anybody else, where this medical students are not more at risk of developing that particular disease, it would be called as a convenience sampling. And hence, convenience sampling is something which is not looked at very good, and hence we usually should avoid the convenience sampling methods. So, for example, if you are doing study on the incidents of meeting with road traffic accidents among adolescents in last 1 year, and if you do that among medical students, it would be convenience, because as such medical students are not expected to be having any high risk of accidents compared to, let's say, other engineering students or commerce students and so on. Okay? Second component is purposive sampling. So, say for example, purposive sampling is such where you purposefully go and meet your study population. So, when your study population is very, so say for example, we talked earlier about transgender adults, right? And to the extent that we employ something called a snowball technique, where we say that it's not easy to find them. So you meet with initial set of a few transgender people, and then you ask them the context of other transgender people, right? And go on asking similarly, and that's how you build up your sample size, right? So that's purposive. You were purposefully interested in a certain kind of people, right? Purposive sampling you usually employ in qualitative studies. Or, for example, your interest is among only those adolescents who consume tobacco in the form of vaping, or you are interested among adolescents who make use of injectable drugs, right? For using injectable drugs. So that's difficult to reach, right? So there you might say that we purposely reached out to those people, right? Or let's say if you are interested in finding out those people within the community who might have experienced domestic violence, not easy to find out. So you probably meet someone and then the other people, right? So that's purposive. Now we go to quantitative approach. In quantitative, we usually talk about probability sampling methods, and I'm primarily talking about four. The first one is a simple random, very simple. I mean, simple in the need, but difficult to use. So what you need in a simple random sampling is you make use of a computer. So you have an entire list of people, entire list of sampling free. So, for example, let's take this example. So the Nikshay is a portal on which the patients diagnosed with tuberculosis are registered in the government system, both from private and public sector. So Nikshay portal gives you, assume that your Nikshay portal gives you a list of 200 people with TB who are currently on treatment for tuberculosis in the city. You want to reach out to 40 of them. So only 40 out of 200, which is only 20%, to ask their satisfaction level with the services received, right? So since you already have a list of 200 people and you wish to select only a few of them, you can ask the computer that generate 40 random numbers, 1 out of 200, and the computer will give you those numbers. You select those numbers, column them, and collect your data, right? So that's simple random. But in routine settings, since we do not have such good registries in India, our patient records are not so meticulous. We are still a paper-based record. So we do not have digital records. In the systems where they have digital records, it's easy to find out a denominator of all your patients, right? So since those systems are not there, many times doing simple random becomes difficult, right? So there are other options. One is a systematic, where, so for example, you have to select 10 houses out of 100 to record their plastic waste segregation practices. So you have to select only 10. So one way is, so for example, when you go to the field, you are not sure who are those 100. So probably you might approximate that it looks like this particular locality has 100. So you divide 100 by, if you wish to go to 10 houses, but you do not wish to collect information from adjacent houses. You do not wish to collect it from the first 10 houses. You wish to be sparsed apart. So you wish to take few samples from one particular part. You wish to take few houses from the other area and so on, right? So what you do is divide 100 by 10 and you get a number, you call it as K. And So K is 10 here in this case. And then take up a random number using the computer between 1 and K. Let's say that number is 6. So you take up the 6th household. So in your sample, you take up the 6 households which are numbered as 6, 16, 26, 36, 46, and so on. So you pick up the first study participant using a random number and then add the sample, keep on adding the sampling interval. So you then select every kth house or select every 10th house. So that's systematic sampling. Stratified sampling is, say for example, doctor believes about adverse events with medical device. Here we assume that the doctors who are at the very senior level, doctors who are in the mid of seniority and doctors who are younger might have different experiences and perception. So you stratify and you say that I'll have a few doctors from senior category, few doctors from middle category, and few doctors from the young category as well, right? So that can be done. Or say, for example, you might say that I'll take part of my sample because I expect urban and rural differences. I'll take part of my sample from urban area and part of my sample from rural areas. That's how you can potentially stratify, right? Or if you are interested in identifying that there is a gender difference in your study findings, so you might say that half of the study sample I'll take from males and half of the study sample from females. So you stratify your study sample. Or it could be multi-stage sampling. So say, for example, if you're interested in injuries among the street sweepers in the city. So there are the municipal corporations and urban areas employ an entire army of sweepers who would every day in the morning be employed in the task of sweeping the streets. Now, so by the nature of their occupation, they are at risk of getting injuries with the sharp objects, right? So if you find out what proportion of them have injuries. So say for example, at stage 1, you select, in every big city, for these staff members, they are meeting points, right? So say for example, the city municipal corporations have identified 50 meeting points, which are scattered through the geography of the city. So you take up only 10 out of those 50. You go to those 10 places and go and ask in the morning hours whoever is available and willing to participate. So that's your inclusion criteria. Whoever is available and willing to participate, that's stage 2. So in the first stage, you sample the meeting points, and in second stage, you try and sample the study participants, right? So it's a two-stage sampling, right? So this was some of the examples to illustrate what are the different sampling methods we can employ in our studies. So I believe those are the aspects to describing study population in the methodology section of our protocol.